Lisa, we're ready.
Great. I hereby call to order this special meeting of the Board of Education for Wilmette Schools, District 39 for Monday, November 30th, 2020, and the time is 7:02. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Lisa Schneider-Fabes,
Here.
Nancy Zaretti,
Here.
Frank Panzica,
Here.
Amy Paling,
Here.
Mark Steen,
Here.
Alan Sternweiler, Karen Stone.
Here.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cremascoli to talk about the metrics team discussion update.
Thank you, President Fabes. As the board is aware, our metrics team meets weekly. This week we met on Monday this morning, and the purpose of the team is to weekly review the important school metrics that guide our reopening. We look at external metrics and COVID spread. We look at internal metrics and operations within our schools. The team includes teachers and administrators and parents and experts as well, and they have been invaluable to guiding and informing our reopening efforts this year and adjustments to ensure the health and safety of our programming and effective instruction, both in person and remotely. So I'd first like to just acknowledge and thank that team who puts forth a great deal of effort and time in the work that they provide to us. This evening, we are coming together to provide the board with an update on the metrics team discussion from this morning and a recommendation regarding in-person instruction for the weeks of December 7th, 14th, and January 4th. I'll give a quick summary of the metrics team discussion this morning, and then I will ask Dr. Glowacki to provide an overview of one of the most challenging operational issues we're facing right now, which has to do with staffing in light of the ongoing external metrics, quarantines, illnesses and absences and exposures as well. So the team did start off, as we have the last couple of weeks, with updates from our subcommittees. We have 3 subcommittees who are working to guide in 3 important areas that were identified as requiring some additional effort and focus. One of those has focused on the operational metrics and ongoing review thereof, and they have created a new survey for us to use. Another group has really looked at preemptive staffing, substitute staffing, and trying to identify where we can anticipate absences and where we could preemptively staff for those absences in anticipation of them in advance. And then a final group has focused on COVID-19 testing. We've been closely monitoring what New Trier is doing with their screening for saliva testing, and have really wanted to evaluate that and potentially bring an option into our district there. But we also have recognized a need for PCR testing. Our families and our staff have struggled at times to access testing, to get results back quickly and efficiently. And so, as the board is aware, we have implemented the Ambry PCR COVID-19 testing program in our district first for our staff. With your approval, we were able to expand that to household members of staff as well as to students. And so we're really excited this week to be launching that program with access to students. Ambry was nice enough to organize with us a bulk testing event that will be held on Thursday. Information went out to families today to register to participate in that testing event. Later on this evening's agenda, you will see a recommendation for a fee associated with participation if an individual is not symptomatic and does not have concern of exposure. We want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate if they wish, and so passing along that direct fee. If insurance can't be accessed to cover the cost of testing, we want to make that available. So you'll see that later on in tonight's agenda. Beyond that, as we've continued to look at screening and surveillance, similar to what New Trier has initiated, we have evaluated a variety of programs and options for screening and surveillance for some of that rapid testing that is a little less sensitive than what the PCR testing can offer, but it can be done more frequently and at a lower cost, more accessible, and those results are ready and available a little more quickly. So we've met with Dr. Campbell as well as with a number of other agencies and decided that Dr. Campbell's safeguard testing program seems like an option that is worthy of our pursuit and the very best option that's currently available to us. And so that team has helped to evaluate that. I would like to bring Dr. Campbell to the Committee of the Whole meeting next week, December 7th, to present to the board his testing protocol and some additional information. And then we'll seek approval for a pilot in December for a small cohort of students and staff. Provided that's successful, then we will move into more district-wide implementation in that first week of January. Again, testing, whether PCR testing or rapid surveillance testing, is not the panacea. All of our experts continue to advise that it is one additional mitigation measure that we can put in place. We think it's worth our pursuit, and so we'll be bringing that forward for further discussion at the Committee of the Whole meeting next week. Beyond that, then the metrics team turned its attention to review of external and internal metrics. As we typically do, we started with an external metrics review, looking at COVID-19 transmission rates, looking at new cases per 100,000. And what we see there is we continue to fall within that substantial red zone of risk. While the mitigation procedures that have been put in place have helped to kind of flatten that curve, we were seeing pretty much exponential growth leading up to about 2 weeks ago. The governor and the Cook County Department of Public Health made some adjustments in their guidance and in mitigation steps, and that helped to flatten the curve. However, positivity and new cases continue to be really significant and indicate a substantial risk of ongoing spread throughout our community. Add to that what many experts are referring to as the very real threat of increased spread that might be realized over the next 10 days as a result of Thanksgiving. Many predict that we will see an increase in positivity rates in new cases over the next several days. Difficult to know, and none of us have a crystal ball, but certainly something we're closely monitoring. It was very nice to see some of that growth flatten a little bit, but certainly those new cases are still falling well above what we have established as our threshold there. Beyond that, then we did turn our attention to the operational metrics, and there the team really spent a substantial amount of time discussing the challenges associated with the growing numbers of quarantines, absences due to illness and/or exposure, limited substitute staff availability, especially in this month of December, and the operational challenges associated with predictably staffing in-person instruction in light of these challenges. We know that the substantial rate of COVID-19 throughout our community and the increasing quarantine restrictions lead the district to anticipate ongoing concerns regarding our ability to staff and operate our schools with consistency, with predictability, with the type of certainty that in-person instruction really requires in order to be effective. As was noted last week, the external and the internal metrics lead us to anticipate increased unavoidable absences and challenges to our internal operations. So currently, we have a number of quarantines that are affecting our staff, and we anticipate quarantines similar to what we were experiencing before break to continue with the rate of COVID throughout our community. There still will be exposures happening. And so as a result of all of that, the metrics team, after having a really in-depth discussion about staffing, arrived at the place where they recognize that if we're going to continue in-person instruction in any appreciable way, in any predictable, consistent way, we will need to prioritize in-person instruction for our neediest of learners, as well as for those who struggle most significantly within the remote learning environments. So in just a minute, I'm going to ask Dr. Glowacki to share a more detailed review of our operational staffing challenges and what I can only describe as a painstaking review of staffing options and opportunities that she and our building administrators have conducted over the last several days. Before she does so, I just want to share a few of my own insights. I've received a lot of communication over the last several weeks, but certainly the last several months as well, really commending our schools for the safe learning environment that we have created. We've done this together with our teachers, with our staff, with our administrators really locking arms, with diligence and tremendous care and support for our students and for our community. We've accomplished what many other districts did not even dare to endeavor upon. And I think all told, we've been incredibly successful at it, both in person and fully remote. Our students have benefited from effective teaching and learning. This has been the result of hard work, of diligent perseverance, and a whole lot of trust in each other. We know that there, at the beginning of the year, were a lot of concerns about our ability to do this safely and effectively. Based on the evidence we have reviewed and the research that has been conducted about schools where mitigation measures are really closely adhered to as occurs in our schools, we know far more now than we did in September. We know that our schools are one of the safest places for our students to be because of that mitigation protocol, because of the distancing and the mask wearing, because of cleaning and regular reminders and the careful attention of our staff to our students. We know and have experienced, despite community spread, far beyond the levels that we had ever anticipated being able to remain in person, that we've been able to do so, and we've been able to do so safely and effectively. We are very proud that we still have not found evidence of within school transmission of the virus. Those risks are very real, and we have done everything we possibly can to overcome the obstacles and to really mitigate that risk to the greatest extent possible. I think I'm going to pause there and ask Heather to just share a little bit about what we currently face. So we've received a lot of questions about if our schools are safe, then why can't we continue to operate? And this really has been the question we've grappled with over the last couple of weeks. We do believe that our schools are safe in terms of the mitigation risk, but we as a school population do not exist on our own. There's a community that surrounds us. It surrounds our lives and our schools, and that community is living through a pandemic. And it affects us, it affects our students, it affects our families, it affects our staff. And every day, individuals are battling with the challenges of exposure, of quarantine, of the very real mental, emotional, financial uncertainty that a pandemic has created for us. We're dealing with personal and family illness and so many other challenges. And we as a staff are not immune to those. We know that our students and our families are not immune to those challenges. We know that our administrators are not immune to those challenges. So all of us are really being impacted in very real ways through this pandemic. And it has become increasingly challenging to staff predictably and with certainty. And I need to put out there that this is, as I've said throughout, through no fault of anyone, everyone has put forth the very best effort. And yet we find ourselves in a predicament where we have to really weigh the predictability and certainty that can be offered to our students with the challenges of continuing with in-person instruction, with the uncertainty that we face in this very real pandemic that we're living through. So, okay, I will pause there. Heather, I'm sorry for delaying so long, but I'll turn it over to you. I hope that you can summarize some of what you summarized for the team this morning. And I know in response, you have followed up with our administrators to really examine what might be possible for us in a predictable way moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Cremascoli. It sure has been a busy couple of days. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to share what we've talked through, what we've worked through, and kind of where we are at the moment. Each week during our metrics review meeting, one of the most critical discussion topics, at least from my viewpoint, is our ability to staff our schools for in-person instruction. We review the number of staff on quarantine, both those that are able to work remotely and those that aren't, and as well as our unfilled positions, staff that are absent that we weren't able to find subs for. How many positions does that make at each school? This data can be found directly in our weekly metrics report. Since the end of August through the beginning of Thanksgiving break, we've had a range for each of those metrics, specifically looking at staff that are on quarantine and working. The range of staff members have been anywhere from 4 to 29 in any given week. When we look at staff members who are quarantined and not able to work for a variety of reasons, we've seen a range of 2 to 16 staff members, again, in any given week. We also monitor our ability to fill staff absences. We call those unfilled absences. And we've ranged anywhere from 1.5 staff absences to 56 in a week. And we've been able to piece together in-person instruction. The weeks leading to Thanksgiving break continue to show increases in these numbers, causing administration to carefully consider our ability to fully staff in-person instruction. Some of the elements that impact staffing include the need for staff to follow quarantine restrictions when experiencing symptoms, awaiting test results, awaiting family members' test results, a result of being a close contact of somebody that is COVID positive, or even post-travel quarantine and personal child care needs. Another factor impacting staffing is the availability of our substitutes. We have markedly increased our substitute pool this fall, thanks to many parents and community members who've been willing to become a substitute for us. As a result, we've attempted to hire about 3 to 5 subs at each of our schools for the weeks of November 16th, December 7th, and December 14th, anticipating a need for increased support with staffing. Unfortunately, our substitutes are not able to work as often as we need them. And we've been able to secure maybe 1 to 3 substitutes each day at our schools. And there have been days where we have not been able to get any extra subs to be able to come in and work in our schools. So the weeks leading to the holidays in December seem to be a difficult time to call upon our substitutes who we would normally seek to help support our staff absences. What I've just described for you is the reality of our experience prior to Thanksgiving break. Our principals have shared that they have pulled support staff members and reassigned them to substitute teach as a result of these staffing needs. The building secretaries and administrators have been creative, beyond creative, and dogged in their attempts to plan for these staff absences. As we consider the weeks of December 7th and 14th, we must consider the staff who are required to quarantine upon return from travel and the increased need for staff to remain at home due to childcare needs because the schools and childcare centers for their own children have been closed. Our staff are doing what is asked of them regarding responding to possible exposures and testing when experiencing symptoms. They're doing exactly what we want and hope everyone would do. And we don't want this to change. We need everyone to remain vigilant in our process and procedures because they've proven effective in helping to keep others safe throughout the last several months. However, our ability to safely and effectively staff our schools is fragile at best, and quite honestly, at a point of real concern. This is a question I've been asked several times during metrics meetings over the last several months. Kind of, what's that threshold? At what point are you concerned? I'm concerned, as are our principals. The building principals and I met this weekend to discuss our options and recommendations based upon our known identified needs. We reviewed the known quarantine needs of each of our schools. There's a range from 1.5 staff members to 10.5 staff members at each of our schools who may need to be absent for several days and will require substitutes. This is in addition to the absences we anticipate for staff who become symptomatic or exposed to a positive person over the next week, which we know will happen. We have data that tells us that. We quickly realized that while remaining in person for instruction is ideal for students and teachers, we simply can't effectively and predictably staff in-person instruction for all of our students. We don't have anyone else to pull or reassign to fill the vacancies. At this morning's metrics meetings, I shared the recommendation of our administration, and that would be to move to a fully remote instructional platform for the weeks of December 7th and 14th, as this would allow for the most predictable and consistent instruction during these 2 weeks. This model would allow for students with comprehensive special education needs to have in-person instruction. It was during this morning's meeting that the committee asked the administration to go back and review our ability to staff not only the programs for students with comprehensive special needs, but also in-person instruction for early childhood, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade classrooms. The rationale for this consideration was that many of our youngest learners struggle most with the remote learning. Therefore, because our need to consider a different instructional model is due to staffing, could just these grade levels be staffed for in-person instruction, concentrating all of our staffing efforts and human capital at these specific grade levels. With this charge, the elementary principals and I reviewed our staffing for each of these grade levels and factored in the known absences. We believe we can staff in-person instruction for students in early childhood, kindergarten, first and second grades. Admittedly, this is less predictable option than the remote learning, and there are more unknowns that could arise over the next few weeks. However, we believe we can and are prepared to provide in-person instruction for these students. Students in grades 3 through 8 will continue in fully remote instruction for the weeks of December 7th and 14th as our recommendation. And students with comprehensive special education needs will also have opportunities for in-person instruction during this time. Finally, if you have observed or been a part of the weekly metrics review meetings, you have likely heard me say that I strongly believe our schools are one of the safest places for students and staff. To my core, I continue to believe this. And perhaps this is why this recommendation comes with such sadness. I know our staff, students, and administrators work tirelessly to provide a safe in-person learning environment for all of our children. Unfortunately, it is our inability to effectively and predictably staff our schools that leads me to this recommendation this evening.
Thank you, Heather. I don't think that this recommendation comes easy to any of us. We have all worked incredibly hard to provide a really safe environment for our students and for our staff. Our staff have worked incredibly hard. Our schools have proven to be quite safe, but they cannot be effective if we cannot staff them in predictable and consistent ways. The metrics team's recommendation this evening is arrived at not because of COVID metrics alone, which initially is really what we thought would drive these decisions. Rather, the recommendation is based on myriad factors that really collide to make in-person instruction not only incredibly challenging, but potentially ineffective to the rigorous learning and growth that we aim to achieve with our students. We do believe that our teachers are prepared to be successful in a remote learning environment for a short period of time, especially leaning on the relationships that they have built through in-person, leaning on the skills that they have developed throughout the last, what has it been, 9-10 months that we've been navigating this really unusual environment. We do believe that our students, especially our older students, can continue to benefit from really rigorous and rich learning opportunities safely over the next several months and in ways, several weeks, and in ways that are predictable and provide the kind of certainty that we know our students need and deserve right now. Therefore, the recommendation of the metrics team that is affirmed by our administrative team tonight is a recommendation to continue the adaptive pause to in-person instruction for the weeks of December 7th and December 14th, with prioritization of in-person instruction for our neediest and youngest students, including our students who are in our special education comprehensive needs program, as well as our students who participate in early childhood, kindergarten, first and second grade classrooms. This evening, the board will be asked to approve that recommendation, the recommendation of the metrics team, and to continue in-person instruction for our neediest and youngest students. Again, this recommendation is not made lightly, and I will tell you that it is with a very heavy heart that I make this recommendation to the board this evening. It is also with an understanding that even with prioritized and targeted instructional programming for our neediest and youngest learners, we very likely will still need to plan for and expect targeted classroom quarantines and/or remote instruction may be required for classrooms or pods of students over the next 2 weeks. We're prepared to navigate that just as we have from the beginning of the school year. In addition, the board is also asked to consider the additional week of remote learning for all students the week of January 4th as we safely transition back to school after the break. We want to ensure that we can safely transition back to in-person schooling, that we can provide predictability for our students, that we can provide adequate time for our families to plan, and just as importantly, that we can coordinate the COVID-19 screening testing for students and staff upon return. Provided we can pilot that in the coming weeks, we will be prepared to launch that first week of January 4th to help as, again, another important mitigation procedure. With that, I think that we have provided as much information as we possibly can at this point to the board and to the community regarding the metrics team considerations and our ongoing review of operations within the school district. Again, I appreciate everyone's support and ongoing efforts, and I know that there will be disappointment throughout our community as a result of this recommendation for our students and for our staff, and yet I think it is in the best interest of the teaching and learning that we all aspire for our students and the health and safety that we remain committed to. With that, happy to open it up to discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kremascoli and Dr. Glowacki. So before we open it up for discussion, I just want to see if I can summarize where we are and add some reflections. So the data and our experience tells us that our schools are safe and that safe schools are the best place for most students, physically, emotionally, and academically. The administration has worked extremely hard for more than 8 months to provide the option for in-person instruction. And for that, we are grateful for their sacrifices and dedication. They have been working around the clock, nights and weekends for months. Thank you. The board has also been unwavering in its commitment to provide in-person instruction as long as the data tells us it's safe to do so, and that we can effectively, predictably, and with the level of confidence and certainty that our children so desperately need right now. Thank you. But to keep schools open, it requires that everyone does their part, that we all follow the guidance from our public health officials, that we all know the common sense precautions. Avoid large gatherings, don't travel, wear face masks, wash your hands, keep your distance. Many have made choices to protect health and safety. Many have made significant sacrifices in their personal and professional lives. Many have been diligent and vigilant. We thank you. Unfortunately, there are some who have not. The consequences of individual actions merge with the actions of others in our community and have resulted in the need for us to make a difficult decision. I know that's really frustrating for those who have made sacrifices and who followed the guidance. Yet I also know that we are a community and each of us is grappling with challenges big and small as we navigate these uncharted landscape. This is a very sad moment. I am sad and I am frustrated too. Here's where we are. External metrics remain high despite mitigation efforts. They've stabilized, but haven't declined significantly. We still don't have any evidence of in-school transmission, and our data tells us that school continues to be one of the safest places to be. we've seen how covering for staff absences has been a challenge, and that challenge is growing. That we have a higher than usual need for subs due to staff illness or their need to quarantine. We've gotten close to not be able to adequately staff our schools, but we've always been able to do so. Through the tremendous work of our administrators, our teachers, support staff, and our substitutes, we've been able to manage despite this exceptionally challenging staffing. That has changed, and that's changed because we're compounding those challenges with two new factors. First, at least 10% of the staff are required to quarantine for a variety of reasons. Travel or exposure requires them to quarantine for 2 weeks. That means that more than 30 staff will remain at home for the next 2 weeks. Combine that with increasing challenges of staff who need to remain home due to the care needs of their own children and household members, and that puts an increased demand on the number of subs we will need on a daily basis. Second, we've recruited a large pool of substitute teachers, but we still have trouble finding a significant number of substitutes who are able and willing to work in the month of December, as many wish to avoid unnecessary exposure prior to the holidays or are unable to commit to daily work within our schools. This means we don't have a pool of substitutes to cover the increasing number of staff needing to quarantine, regardless of the reason. When you add those two factors to the existing staff challenges, we don't have sufficient staff to keep schools open and to provide the consistency and predictability that effective instruction requires. This is an incredible heavy lift. Many would have said back in September that there's no way we could safely open our schools, but we did. Many said that there was no way we could maintain safety and a supportive learning environment across in-person and remote learning, but we did. Many did not believe that we would be able to make Halloween, much less to Thanksgiving. And in fact, many districts were not able to do so, but we did. The administration is recommending we increase the time and focus of remote learning. We would be fully remote for grades 3 through 8. Grades pre-K through second plus comprehensive needs would continue to be in person. Staff would be teaching from their classroom unless they are in quarantine, ill, or require special accommodation to do so. I wholeheartedly back the administration's recommendations, but I do it with great sadness. And I want to be clear. These changes are not due to concerns about health and safety, but they are being made because we can no longer staff our schools adequately. If we can't provide instruction for all, I agree with the need to prioritize in-person instruction for our learners who need it most, the youngest and those with comprehensive needs. Providing in-person instruction requires sacrifice and commitment from all of us, staff and families alike. Let's begin planning now so that we can move back to in-person instruction when we return in the new year. But that will take continued sacrifice on everyone's part. I urge the entire District 39 family, staff and students alike, to understand that the choices you make are not made in a vacuum. They will determine how we are able to proceed moving forward. And with that, I open it up to the floor for questions, comments. Ms. Stone, you're on mute.
Yep. Thanks, President Fabes. I really appreciate your comments. And I want to thank the administration for their tireless work, their creativity, and their unwavering commitment to in-person learning. And it's not lost on me that the vast majority of people across our stakeholder groups made decisions sacrificing maybe their own personal preferences for the greater good. And there's a barn raising quality there that I greatly admire. I do have a question about the week of December 14th. So I understand that if a quarantine has already started for someone right now, and it's just started, we would know that they would be quarantined through this week and next week. I'm wondering if we could hold off on December 14th, a decision, and maybe reassess next week and see if maybe there's subs who have had a change of heart, or there's people that if we knew next week that didn't need to quarantine as much, maybe we could add in 3rd and 4th grade. I'm just wondering what the thinking is there on December 14th, that week.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question, Erin. I think you're asking the right question. And we too have asked that question. I think at the heart of our challenge is trying to provide the best instructional environment for our students possible. And while we recognize that in-person instruction provides so many benefits to our students, we also know that predictability provides a lot of benefit to our students and to the families who support them, as well as to our staff who are planning to ensure that that remains a rigorous learning environment. And so our thinking really was that if we are remote this week and next week, it made sense to us to continue that through the 3rd week leading into the winter break for our students. Again, knowing that it takes some time to build those routines, to support our students to be successful within that environment. And it allows us to predictably plan for the kind of learning that we want our students to engage in. That said, is there a possibility that we would have a better chance of staffing the week before winter break for that 1 week, the week of December 14th? I think that's a fair question. And I would turn to Heather. I don't know if you have the data in front of you that would help to guide the answer to that question, but I think the reality is it comes down to predictability and the ability to really be consistent. What we recognize for our students is the highs and lows of the uncertainty can sometimes be more detrimental than the predictability that 3 weeks of remote learning might be able to provide for our students. Heather, do you have additional insights that you might be able to share?
I don't. Sorry.
Mr. Cesarretti?
Okay. Oh, thank you, President Faves. So I'm going to ask the question. So what would it look like if we voted against your recommendation, Carrie? Like, what does that look like? Yeah, you talked about the best instruction and certainty and predictability, and I personally think you have very high standards. But is there room for compromise here? Do we need to have the best? Could we have good enough?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And the board certainly has the authority to vote against the recommendation that's been brought to you today. What would it look like? I think it likely would look like a lot of uncertainty. I think we would be moving pods of students or classroom cohorts into remote learning as a result of either exposure within the classroom or a staff member or several staff members who are needing to quarantine. The inconsistencies of that is really what worries us. And the effectiveness of instructing and planning for that kind of a learning environment, knowing that it's going to be as fragile and difficult as it is, just doesn't seem like the right decision to make in the best interest of our students and in education. But that's what it would look like. We already have experienced that relatively fragile environment. As President Fabes described, we have that already fragile environment compounded now by the increased risk of quarantines as a result of the break, as a result of exposure, as a result of the continued high rates of positivity and new cases within our community. So that's what it would look like. It would likely mean a lot more quarantines targeted. Heather.
I just would add, we talked a little bit about that, John, in our metrics review team this morning, and it it's coupled with then last minute decision making. So the switch from in-person to remote learning could happen, late one night for the next day or early that morning, even when we became aware of the inability to staff a particular classroom. So that could be a likely outcome.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you. I actually attended the meeting this morning, but I missed the end. So I appreciate that.
Frank, go ahead.
Well, first off, I want to thank everybody, in particular the administration, for the work so far and the work, unfortunately, that will be continuing for quite some time. I know the dedication to the children is the reason that you work this hard. And just to put it in perspective, I know that the administration job would be easier if we just went remote. There's a lot of things that you're doing to balance. And that extra work and that extra time is because you care about the children, and we care that you care about them. So thank you very much for that work and the continuing work that I know will be taking place. One little factoid, we talked about the number of substitutes, and there's a lot of work involved in lining up the substitutes. I know Heather could talk to us for quite some time about her interviewing skills have improved dramatically over the last couple of months. But I believe the number was something like 50 substitutes in our pool of people. That's a very large number of people, a large number of which are not classic substitute teachers that are used to or have been substituting recently. So one, was hard to line that up. Two, it's a pool of volunteers. They're not the full-time professional career substitutes. And in that aspect, we have to take into account, as you said, a number of them just are not available. And on any given day, there may be some are, some aren't. So I thought that was useful. I know we talked this morning, and I was thinking in the metric meeting about the concept of how much to stay open and how much of a risk to take. And what I took from the discussion, what I learned was the description that if you find out at 7 o'clock in the morning that a teacher's not available. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons, and that's the way life is in this wonderful world of COVID. Then you immediately have to call those kids, and those kids basically don't get instruction that day. And I know from a parent community standpoint, the 80+% of the parents or the school children that have chosen in person and have reaffirmed that for the second semester want to take a certain amount of risk that by sending them in person, they may be a little bit more disruptive than if they just stayed home remote all the time. But it's a balancing act. If there's a classroom here and there like we've been doing, that's the risk of staying open. But if we know it's going to be like popcorn, every time a class closes, it's 2% of the kids. If there's 4 or 5 classes that close in a given day, now we're starting to talk about a fairly large disruption. So that balance was what I took away from this morning's meeting, of why we can't keep at the same level we're at, but that we could minimize that disruption by going to the K-2. So that's the way I understood it and what I learned. And then my final point is we have done, not we, that would mean that I had done something. You have done a tremendous job making the school safe. Everyone involved, the whole community of District 39, the metrics show it. And what we're doing now, whatever we decide to vote on for now, I think the baseline that says we know how to run a schools as safely as we can in this environment is what's going to get us back to where we are today or better as soon as possible. So we're not recommending, you know, we lost the magic formula and we'll have to figure it out. What we're saying is we know how to do it. We just ran into a logistics problem. And as soon as we can solve the logistics problem, and some of that'll be natural after the holidays, we can go back. And I think that's really important, that we know and we plan on going back as soon as the logistics are solved, that it's not a safety issue and it's not an understanding issue, that we know how to teach children safely. And that's the reason we're here, to teach children safely. So thank you for all the work you've done. And I also am sad that this is where we're at, but I appreciate the work we got to where we are, and I support the proposal that's on the table.
You are on mute, Lisa.
I was like, why isn't Ellen speaking? Ellen?
I was about to say, I think maybe you were mouthing my name, so I was going to start in. First, not to sound like a broken record, but I also have to say thank you to Lisa, first of all, for so eloquently stating or restating the way that as a board, kind of the way that things are playing out, and I'll speak for myself the way I agree that I see it, things, and in terms of responsibility of the whole community. I said this at the board meeting, the last board meeting, and just so hoping that everyone, staff, teachers, parents, kids, every single person who steps foot in District 39 is part of this community. We are a community all in this together, and therefore we all have a responsibility, equal responsibility, for ourselves and our actions. It's just, you know, we all have to take responsibility for what we do. And if we want the schools to be open, if we all truly want them to be open, then it's just from, you know, I guess from here on forward, I said this before Thanksgiving, and now I'm gonna have to say it from here on forward for the next holidays that are coming up. I'm gonna have to dig deep and realize that, you know, you're not living in a vacuum. No one is. We are all going through the same stuff. We all have families. We all have children. We all do or don't have jobs. There are people who have lost their jobs and are dealing with all kinds of stressors in their lives. And this is a very difficult time for all of us. And there are a lot of people who are under lots and lots of stress. And this is just so difficult for every single one of us. And it's not a time to be selfish and think just about yourself, any of us. It's a time to think about other people and how our actions are affecting all of those around us. You know, health-wise, in terms of how it affects our schools, and, you know, whether or not someone else's child can go back to school, and whether someone else can go back to work, or whether they can afford to hire somebody to take care of their children, or whether they have to stay home, you know, and maybe it's not just about ourselves and whether we can afford it, or whether, you know, or whether we're single, or, you know, whatever it is that your situation is. If you're, you know, single, married, kids, no kids, whatever it is, If you have parents or grandparents or whatever that you're caring for, or yourself, if you're high risk or if you're no risk, if you're young or old and this affects you or it doesn't, it's not about you, it's about the person next to you. And so now's the time. This has gone on long enough where it's time to turn to the person next to you and to think about the person next to you, the parent next to you, the teacher next to you, the staff person, the parapro, the child, and really take a long, hard look. And right now, the decision tonight is heartbreaking. It really is. It really is heartbreaking to me. I'll support what we ultimately decide to do. I applaud the administration. I know this has just been so hard and that you work night and day. And I know this has just been very difficult. And I can't thank you enough for the hard work that you put into this. So, it's not easy on any of you. It's not easy on us. It's not easy on the metrics committee, who works hard and argues hard and tries to figure this out every week. It's a pandemic. This is not easy. So that said, I do have two questions. One, I want to echo a little bit about the December 14th. I do understand the reasoning behind it, and the continuity. I'm not completely, this is just my personal, I'll go with the decision of the board and your recommendations, but I just wanted to express that I'm not certain that I'm not certain about the notion of that continuity necessarily is the best at the moment, just from a parent standpoint and child, because there's been so little of it that, I think people have become used to, and I'm speaking, I guess, for myself, but I'm wondering if people have become so used to the notion of a lack of continuity that what is the difference is the question I would ask. It's like we're so accustomed to having things change so quickly. And, I think, Carrie, as you say it, like being able to turn on a dime or, to pivot. And so my feeling would be, I would love the opportunity to be able to play it out another week and see if we could get the kids back in school for that week. It's a week, and I don't know, I just, that's something I would wish for. It's a valuable week, it's like, if we could have that, then it's, I would take it. If it was my choice, I would take it. But if it's impossible and it makes your lives and much harder and it makes this so much more complex, and I know how many moving parts there are, I really, and that's something I think everyone, I'm going to say it again to drive it home so that everyone out there watching this meeting understands there's so many moving parts to this. It is so complicated, and Heather's job and the administration's job is so hard. I know you spent countless hours mulling through this, so I don't want to throw a wrench in this and ruin all your hard work. That's not my intention. But if it's a possibility and it's within the realm of reality, that would be my wish. And then the other one, which is probably going to make you want to punch me in the face, is just it's just a question that comes to mind, and maybe it's more of a question that it may be more realistic for the future, because I have a feeling this is not the only time that we're ever going to have to face this type of hard question or situation. But it seems to me, I understand the focus on the youngest. I get it, that there's that it's hardest for them to get the remote learning thing that, or catch on to it, or, but the flip side of that has been, we have done an awful lot of focusing, it seems to me, on the youngest, and they've been in school the most from the very beginning. They have gotten the most education face to face of anybody in our district since day one. We started them early. They've been in the most. They get every day. And our older kids have really gotten the short end of the stick this year. The kids who've chosen to be in school have really gotten the short end of the stick this year, because they're not in very often. They only get a couple days a week, and they started later because we needed the time to have the teachers feel comfortable, and to get for us to really create a safe environment for where we felt comfortable, right? And now to then prioritize again the youngest over the older kids seems unfair to me. It really does. And I worry that, the older kids are suffering, to me, emotionally, socially. Like, I've heard from parents that's, it's concerning to me. I mean, from an educational standpoint, academically. And so I'm not saying to throw everything, all the hard work you've done figuring this out for this week out the window, because there's really very valid, and you guys are the educators. I'm not trying to jump down on the dance floor on this. You guys know what you're doing, and I trust you on that. In terms of what the little kids need, but at some point, I would love to really understand or have feedback, maybe even now, about how we can make it up to, how we can really make it up to, or when do we catch up with the older kids? Like, how do we make this up to them? Like, where do we fill in the gap? Or could, have we focused enough on the little kids? Would it work with the older kids? I mean, I don't know, like, anyway. Was it considered, Carrie, or not really?
You broke up just there for a second. I think what you're asking is, was it considered to offer in-person instruction at the 5-8 level instead of at our youngest student level? I think everything was considered, to be really frank with you. The challenges are many. And one of the challenges recognized is that our youngest learners really do struggle because of they're still learning to learn differently than our older students are. Yet, for sure, our older students are impacted. I think the other thing that did come into consideration is the simple and straightforward number of staff who are needing to be absent due to quarantine at our 2 schools on the 5-8 campus. Those numbers are really, really challenging, more challenging than the absence numbers that are predicted at our elementary schools. So it really was driven by those 2 reasons primarily, the needs and then the staffing opportunities that existed. Heather, I would turn to you, or Kristen, if there's other insight that you could share that I didn't mention.
I'll just add to that, in that when our students in grades 5 through 8 go remote, they're actually with their teacher synchronously every day. I'm not suggesting that that is acceptable or as good as being in person every single day, but it is more in front of your teacher time.
Thank you, Heather. And Carrie, thank you.
John?
Yeah, I had a related question to Ellen's, I think, second thought about what can we do to remediate this. Well, I guess I don't want to start with a pretext. So I think that kids working remotely impacts them and their learning, right? So what I'd like to focus on, moving forward is, well, what investments can we make? What changes can we make in the future, assuming the COVID ends here at some point, vaccines come, whatever, summer, to remediate some of these issues that I think, I'm not an expert, right? But I have this overriding understanding and belief, frankly, that this experience is negatively impacting the kids who are going to be off, right, remote until I guess the middle of January at this point.
Yeah, I think, John, you're speaking to a couple of different things. And I know for our 5th through 8th grade students, one of the biggest worries we have is their well-being, their mental health, their connection. We know for our 5th through 8th grade students, that really is significant. I think what we have seen and what we've experienced in person as well as remote, our teachers can still be very effective in their instruction academically. We don't have right now significant worries about gaps in that regard, even though our students are not on campus with the same frequency as our younger students. When they are on campus, their instruction is so much more targeted because of the small group that they have access to during that time. It really comes down to a reorganization of the way in which our teachers are teaching when a student is in front of them and in person, and when they are then remote. But that doesn't solve or address the challenge that I think sits on the other side of that, which is the social and emotional well-being of our 5th through 8th grade students. All of us are experiencing this sense of disconnect and isolation, and all of our well-being right now is being challenged. And that is not the result of in-person or remote learning. It maybe is compounded because of that. But for all of us, we're living through this time of incredible uncertainty. And so I think that, John, is a question we need to really focus in on, especially when we're able to have our students back on campus and we're able to provide them more targeted community building efforts and more targeted social and emotional supports, more targeted social work. How can we really make sure that our 5th through 8th grade students are really reached in those endeavors? It can be hard because that age group can be really hard to connect with. And I expect it will be even that much more challenging as we're coming out of this pandemic and kids have learned a new way of being, and we need to support them to reintegrate. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Amy's been trying to get in here.
Hey, I guess, so like most of us probably, I feel pretty conflicted coming into this conversation. I will say that it's no surprise, but I feel the weight of the immense consideration you all have given this, and that it's not a surprise, but it means a lot. And I'm weighing that with my thoughts. We are where we are. And so I guess I do also wonder about the second week here, the last week before winter break. And I hear what you all are saying about consistency, and that has been a goal for us all along. And I think that is really important for kids. However, I worry about this stretch of losing the routines. I feel like if it is possible for us to be in school for a few days, if for the kids who are 3rd through 8th, it may be worth it. I don't know. I put it out there on the table just for discussion. I think if you go a month and a half without being in person, you're stepping yourself way back as just in terms of relationships and routines and learning. So I guess I would like to consider or just talk about if we're able to staff that week, is it worth it? To me, every day that they're in person is worth it. I'm worried about the kids who are getting too comfortable at home. And this routine being lost, I think is, it's just important to think about. I also worry about that week after break, if we're deciding about that already. I guess I need more convincing that we need to decide that so proactively. Maybe we do, maybe it's worth it for planning and consistency. I think safety comes first, but it feels like we're just deciding further in advance than maybe we need to.
I want to just tack on, and Elle, you can go next, but I want to tack on and give Dr. Cremascoli a chance to respond to this. There's kind of a new word I think that we've started talking about, which is, and maybe it's not new and maybe I just noticed it, but predictable as something we're shooting for. And so as a non-educator, when we're talking about the balance that Amy just referenced, predictability versus the need to see people as children and the mental health of children. I too, while I am completely in support of your recommendations, wonder about whether or not we need to make the decision for the week of the 14th today or not. And if you could also just explain a little more about why predictability is so important.
So I'll tackle the second first. But again, I'll turn to my team if there's additional information you might be able to add on. But I think there's two things that we're really most concerned about there. One is both center around the needs of students, but one really focuses on what we recognize for our students in those highs and lows of the uncertainty of, can I go back? Am I not going back? What should I plan for? That has a really significant impact, I think, on our students and on their well-being. It also impacts our families in their ability to plan. And so we're concerned about that. The second part of that, which again focuses on our students, but is a little more teacher focused as well, is our teachers' ability to really plan for the kind of rigorous instruction that we expect of them. And it takes a lot for an in-person teacher to pivot to remote and do so really effectively. And I think with today, they had the opportunity to really dig in and do some lesson planning for the rest of this week. So we have pretty good confidence that this week is going to be an effective week of learning for our students. Next week now, for those who remain remote, will also be a really good week of learning for them because it continues the pattern that we've started. The week after that, I think, again, that predictability and ability for our teachers to really plan for those meaningful lessons, which are quite frankly just delivered very differently if you're in a fully synchronous remote environment than if you're doing a hybrid every other day in-person environment. And so I think both of those factors come into play. And again, especially when we're thinking about our 5th through 8th grade students who need more than ever that predictability and certainty of what to expect. Katie or Heather, Kristen, I certainly would welcome your contributions if you have other thoughts.
Maybe I'll ask another question then to kind of, because it's hard for me to wrap my head around predictability still. So if I know, so I plan to be in school every week one way or another, and I know 2 weeks off, in terms of not in person. And then I know the 14th I get to go back. Why isn't that planning? Like why is not that predictable if I know that's going to happen?
If we know with certainty that that's going to happen and we can provide for that, I agree wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
I think we don't have certainty that we can actually provide that. And that's where we then have to weigh the pros and cons of certainty versus in-person instruction. But you are not wrong that we absolutely could make a decision now for next week. And then the board has another meeting on the 7th and could consider the week after that. It leaves everyone in the sense of limbo. And again, I feel like I'm sounding a bit like a broken record, but that uncertainty in the current environment that we're all living through, it just increases the anxiety of everyone and the advocacy of everyone and the focus on what's going to happen for everyone, instead of really just putting all of our effort into making that remote environment as effective as it possibly can be. But that said, we're weighing pros and cons here. There is not a perfect solution. I did see Heather raise her hand, so I'll turn Heather to.
I was just going to add that, and it piggybacks on what you were saying, Carrie, and that I don't know that we're at a point today where we could say, yes, for sure, we can staff in person on December 14th for that week. We could say we can pause and make that decision 1 week from now, still leaving that unpredictable piece and that uncertainty for that week, except to know that that decision will get made on December 7th.
Mark, you haven't said, did you want to jump in? And then I see all these
Katie's
hands.
had her hand up for a while. I'd like to hear what Katie has to say, and then maybe I would add a
Sorry,
comment.
Katie.
Sure. I'll just add this one additional piece. So if I look at it from our students' perspective, when we begin the school year in any classroom, it's about transitioning in, it's about creating that community, those routines. So for our enhanced remote learners, they've already transitioned. They're so comfortable. They have the routines down. This decision will not impact them because they will continue to have that great education that our teachers are providing them. When we talk about our in-person students, when majority of their learning so far has been in person, for them to transition, it will take a day or two to adjust. And then to kind of engage in to engage in the learning in that modality, and then to transition out again, to then come back to in person. It just offers these additional pieces that they would have to, work through. So if you have a short amount of time, you're transitioning pretty quickly. Just as they get used to this new modality, then they need to then shift again and vice versa. So that just from the student's lens of that, I think I would offer that in addition to everything else that everyone has been saying.
Mark?
So thank you, Katie. I guess, first of all, what I would say is that, you really don't know what people are capable of until they're in crisis. This is not how I wanted to find out what our administrative team is capable of, but I am unsurprised and absolutely amazed each time you all deliver another piece. And when I say another piece, I mean, look, this morning it sounded like we were not even going to be able to do K through 2. You guys have scraped together and put your heads together and found a way to offer that. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. The other thing that I would say is when we talk about this balance of, predictability versus the ability to be in person, that to me is at its core an operational issue. I am for more in person rather than less, but so is everybody else on this call. And when I hear the anguish, and I really do hear anguish in Heather's voice and in Carrie's voice and in others who have spoken about not being able to have in person, I have a high degree of confidence that if we can find a way to have more in person, we will. And that if you all say, as the educational experts, that you really think that the predictability outweighs the in-person experience, then I trust your judgment on that because you're the closest to it. With that said, if you really don't think we have to make a decision until the 7th, then I think we're all holding on to hope. And, you know, we can't, I've been surprised by this, by the trajectory of this disease all along the way. And if you don't think that that has significant, you know, creates significant operational challenges or issues, boy, that sounds attractive to me. But if you tell me, you know, no, it really is a challenge that isn't worth trying, you know, that we can't overcome or that outweighs, then I'm going to go with that. The other thing that I would like to say is, or it's actually a question, which is, does the, for that week of I guess the 11th, so the 4th presumably will be transitioning back through remote, but does the balance between in-person and predictability change as we get into January, where we know that we will have a longer period of in school, you know, regular school without long holiday periods? And, you know, would it be, does that make it possible to start to say, you know, maybe we'll go with a little bit of unpredictability for a couple of weeks to get some more in person in, because we know that we are transitioning to more predictability, or we never know that, but we hope and have good reason to believe that we are transitioning to more predictability. So that's my long question, but my question is, how does that balance change for after the break?
Yeah, I think in terms of that question, we are, as educators, always challenged with these weeks between Thanksgiving and winter break. It's a difficult time to teach really effectively because we do have those transitional periods happening. It's now, again, compounded by the fact that we have to grapple with all the quarantines that so many are having to navigate. And so, yes, I do think that entering into January, we do see a longer stretch of time where we are in school and in person without that risk of another really quick, long break. These weeks are just, they're really difficult.
Ellen, and then Aaron. Go ahead, Elle.
Sorry, I just want to follow up way back on something I said before that I misspoke on, and I wanted to thank Carrie actually for saying what I was thinking in a much better way than I said it. So thank you, Carrie. But I wanted to clarify because it was important, and I think Katie actually mentioned it as well. I think it's important that, because when we were, I think in our board meeting and also in our committee, the whole, we did go over academics and growth and all that. And Katie gave a beautiful presentation showing that our students are doing, in fact, very well. And are keeping up, actually. And so I misspoke because I didn't mean to mention academics, actually, when I was talking about our older students. But it is really the heart of it that I've been concerned about is the social emotional piece of it, and the lack of, you know, the older students' ability to really be together, you know, as much as the younger kids. And I'm not going to say much more because Carrie, you already said it better than I did originally, but I just wanted to clarify that, and thank you for saying it the right way, and then reiterate what Katie had said the other day about I think it goes back to just what an amazing job you all have been doing this year, in such a difficult situation, that you all are doing a really amazing job in a tough time, in more ways than one, to say the least. But yeah, and I will also agree with what Mark just said. If it is without too much extra administrative nightmare, I also stand behind that whole notion of holding out hope for that week of the 14th, if it makes sense to do so. I think I stand behind that as well. So thank you.
Somebody's bread done. Come time to take it out of the oven. Need a little levity. Erin, were you trying to get in?
I was. So I completely understand why pivoting from in-person learning and teaching to remote learning and teaching is a heavy lift, which is why I'm glad that today was a day for remote planning. I'm wondering if doing the opposite direction pivot is equally arduous when we're balancing and weighing considerations for that week of the 14th.
I would suggest it's arduous in the unknown. So if I'm a teacher and I'm planning for remote instruction, I'm spending a lot of time planning for what that looks like, which is very different than in-person teaching. And if then I'm not sure that that's actually the environment I'm going to be teaching, and I might hold off on that planning, or I might continue with the planning and then be told, nope, now you got to flip it all on its head. And it again leads to that lack of really predictable planning to make that teaching and learning as effective as it possibly can be.
Other comments, questions? I wanted to thank everybody for this conversation, exchange of thoughts and ideas. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about. Let's move on to COVID-19 screening testing option update. Dr. Kremskoli.
Thank you. I'm happy to. Mark serves on our testing team, and I saw his hand go up. I wasn't sure if Mark, you want to contribute to that conversation.
I actually was just going to clarify the end of the last conversation, which is we are going to take a vote later, and we've had some different suggestions. So we can wait until we get to the vote. I have no problem with that, but we're going to have to make a decision on what we're going to vote on. So I want to make sure we have that in the hopper.
We do. Duly noted. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So I previewed this as I was talking about the metrics team discussion update because they are so closely intertwined. So I'll give just another brief summary here. We are looking at two different testing options. One is the PCR testing, which is the more sensitive test that is diagnostic, and that is what we currently have available through Ambry testing. We're really excited to launch a bulk testing event on December 3rd, which is Thursday, and information is out to families regarding registration for that, as well as to staff. If a student is to participate in that, the board approved a fee of $20 to cover the district costs of administering that test and processing the test. The remaining costs of that test are billed to insurance for someone who is symptomatic or has a concern regarding potential exposure to someone who might have COVID. Another option on a bulk testing day would be to make the testing available to someone who is not symptomatic and does not have concern regarding exposure, but still wants to test as a precautionary measure. In those instances, only available on bulk testing days, the district is charged a fee of $85. That means The test is not billed to insurance. It is simply institutional billing is what it's called. It just gets billed directly to the district. And so to make that option available to our families, the board is asked this evening to approve that fee option for our families. Again, it simply is another option if someone prefers to access testing in that way rather than go to, say, CVS or to their healthcare provider or to one of the many other testing sites where we know there are some longer lines and access challenges. So the board is asked to approve that later on this evening's agenda. The second element is the ongoing screening and surveillance of our students and staff, and we have been working really hard to identify the best option here. We believe right now the best option is Dr. Campbell's safeguard testing. So we will be inviting Dr. Campbell to come at the committee of the whole meeting on December 7th and asking the board for approval of a contract to pilot that and then to launch in January. It is partially due to that testing that we're looking at that first week of January and transitioning back to school to allow us to really implement that testing, as well as reassess our staffing, the quarantines that might be in order at that point, and any additional guidance that comes from the government. That all kind of comes into play as we're looking at that first week in January. The board is aware our recommendation right now is to take that first week as a transition week, meaning it's remote learning for students as we transition back safely to in-person instruction. That certainly could be adjusted. In hearing the board's concerns today about in-person instruction and really trying to maximize that, that decision does not need to be made right now. It really comes down to predictability again, and the ability to plan for what happens as we return from these more extended breaks and as we plan for a transition back to in-person instruction. So testing comes into consideration as we look at that first week of January.
Are there questions about testing? And just to be clear, so we are not requiring testing for students to come back, should we come back?
Right, there's no requirement for students or staff to test, with the exception, of course, of those requirements that are set forth by the County Department of Public Health. If someone is symptomatic and under medical evaluation, testing is required. And in those instances, it is a PCR test that's required. Ambry allows us to test for that. And our school nurses have really emphasized that that has been a significant challenge for our families to access that testing. Many families have gotten confused and accessed rapid testing, which is not as reliable as the PCR test. And so the Ambry PCR test allows for that as well.
Mark?
I do just want to clarify on the mass testing that's coming up. My understanding, but please correct me if I'm missing something, is when we say we're running a pilot, it's really just an operational pilot. We are not looking for a specific level of positivity or sensitivity or specificity or anything like that in terms of the test results, just simply piloting to show that, to learn and demonstrate to ourselves that we can do a mass testing type of protocol.
Absolutely right, Mark. Thank you for clarifying that. It was the recommendation of Dr. Campbell and the Safeguard team that a pilot on a smaller scale is advantageous before launching district-wide, absolutely for logistics and operations, not to evaluate the test itself, but how do we distribute the materials? How do we collect those materials? How do we get it to the testing agency? And then how do we result those tests as we receive those results back?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, I'm sorry.
I just had one clarification. There's been so many changes, I've lost track. Do we have any extracurricular activities that are running through the school, with the school? And the reason I ask is just to kind of compare it to like New Trier, the testing is optional unless you're involved in an optional program, in which case it's mandatory if you're involved in an optional program, which I think makes a lot of sense. A lot of back and forth words there. Do we have any optional programs that we support right now?
Not in the way that Nutria does. So Nutria does that for their extracurriculars and their athletic programs, those which they're able to offer right now. And that we don't have those operating right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Others? Ellen?
Speaking of, with this testing, is there potential or even thought of the possibility of offering any of that in the spring, maybe? Does this open up the possibility for that?
Of extracurricular activities?
Mhm.
I don't think testing alone would open up that possibility. But shifting metrics, opportunities for larger groups of individuals to gather. The thing we have been really extra cautious about is the bubbles we've created for our students and the intermixing that would occur if we started offering some of those programs. So really for those two reasons, it's the sensitivity around the bubbles and then also just the gathering of students, which I think at this point has complicated or made difficult even at Nutria their ability to offer some of those programs. So certainly is something we would love to be able to offer. I know many of our staff have continued to really advocate for offering after school programming for our students, extracurricular or athletic programming. And I, for one, would love to see that happen for many reasons. So
That makes sense.
thanks.
Other questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, I am going to move to public comment. This is an opportunity for the community to address the board. The district has requested that public comments be emailed to publiccomment@wilmette39.org. Tony, have we received any public comments via email?
Yeah, we've received quite a few. So timing will be needed tonight as well.
Can I just ask a quick point of process for the board? Do we need to take a 3-minute break or can we proceed with public comment? Okay, hearing no request for breaks, then we'll go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
think break. Sorry, I was on
Oh,
mute.
sorry. Okay. So, Tony, is this, I mean, just in terms of, I'm not really sure how it works remotely. Do we just leave our cameras on? Do we turn off our cameras, walk away, and then come back? Are there rules about this?
I would recommend you can turn off your camera. We're still gonna, for those watching, we're still gonna be live streaming, but just know that our cameras may be off and microphones may be muted for the next 3 minutes. So that's what I would recommend. You feel free to turn both those off, but the public who are viewing just should know that we will return.
Okay, I'll see everybody in a couple minutes. Thank you. You want to go ahead and start with public comment? We are all ears.
Great, thanks. And tonight, Katie Lee is going to alternate with me. Rusha Patel, hello. Would you consider sending out an updated survey about holiday travels? I think it has changed since the initial survey. I'm not sure you'll find a lot of families traveling for the week. I think what I'm hearing more of is, well, if we're going remote, I'd like to know so we can leave town. Wrong mentality. I think having kids in person in school is preventing families from making decisions about leaving town at all. Something to consider, I think. People are weary and not wanting to leave town at all. And a lot of families are scrambling for childcare. Thanks. Rusha Patel. For kids' mental, emotional, and physical health, happy kids, happy pediatricians. And then she references a New York Times article and then continues to say, the report also found that school closures did little to slow the spread of the virus while causing long-term harm. While higher education institutions have played a role in community transmission, studies cited in the report showed no consistent association between school reopening status and COVID-19 infection rates. The longer schools are closed, the more children suffer from extensive learning losses with long-term negative impacts, including future income and health, the report found. Rusha Patel. Wonderful article, and D39 has implemented the highest level of safety. You all did an amazing A+ job, and we're all so grateful for the in-person learning. Standing ovation to you from all of us in-person families. COVID and schools staying open are not matched. Kids need school, and they are safe in them, as the world has shown. Why are we closing schools? Keeping kids out of the classroom will make recovering from the pandemic harder in the long term, while not keeping us any safer in the near term. Read in The Atlantic. And then she references an article at Apple News. Rusha Patel. Hello all. Thank you for your work. I'm writing for my kids in kindergarten and third grade who thrive with in-person instruction with their phenomenal teachers. Why are teachers calling in sick, and why can't we staff them? It doesn't make any sense to shut schools or teacher absence. Keeping K-4 in person is very important and necessary for the kids' mental health. Testing is in place. Your protocols are in place. It's working. COVID is not spreading in schools. There's no reason to shut down and remain remote. It's such a disadvantage to the students that cannot learn from home. As a community, you asked us to stay home, skip family gatherings for school opening, and the teachers had gatherings and traveled. It's not acceptable or fair to our kids or the community. Total lack of respect. Keep schools in person for all of us.
That's 3 minutes.
Katie, I think you have the next one.
Oh, I saw that as Rusha, sorry. And this public comments from Meg Hademan. Despite everyone's best effort, remote learning is a disaster for my 6th grade son and so many other students with IEPs and other learning challenges such as ADHD. We know that he has greatly benefited from being able to attend school in person 4 days per week. We see the pandemic numbers and understand the difficulty of the situation. However, we are extremely concerned that our son and other students will again get lost as pandemic numbers seem likely to make this pause long term. What does the district intend to do to address the needs of those students who simply are not successful in remote learning?
Rachel Hilgeman. Hello, Dr. Cremascoli and board members. Hope everyone has had a nice Thanksgiving holiday. I've been looking at the latest metrics in preparation for tomorrow's metrics meeting. As of November 28th, our local Wilmette numbers have not shifted much and still remain below 8%. Latest number is 7.19. The regional numbers have decreased more than 2 percentage points since the last meeting on November 20th. The positivity rate for Winnetka is 9.61%, and they are not taking an adaptive pause. Their in-person students return to school tomorrow, November 30th. It is important that we stay on track and get the kids back in school on December 7th. I anticipate there will be a push from the WEA folks for at least an additional week of remote. There is no reason for this based on the local positivity rate and the steady decline in regional numbers over the last 10 days. As always, thank you for your continued commitment to this process.
Public comment by Davina Young. I'm writing to express my support for continued in-person learning for the 2 weeks leading up to winter break for our district. My 2nd grader has had 3 separate classmates all testing positive for COVID this fall, and the class quarantined, but thankfully there was no spread of COVID in her class, meaning all precautions taken by staff and students seem to be working. In-person learning is critical for our kids, and having them out of the classroom for so many weeks really affects their socialization, happiness, and in our case, and ability to thrive academically. At 8 months pregnant, I am particularly aware of keeping everyone safe, and I'm still confident that the best thing for our kids is to be in school. I am hoping the decision to keep our kids out of school is based on metrics and not based on staffing needs, which is something I feel and would hope the district would be able to resolve without shutting itself down. We moved to this district specifically to provide our kids with better quality education, and we are hoping that our daughter continues to get the type of education we hope for.
Frank, I need you to give me about 2 minutes. I have another one from Rachel Hilgerman, and it took about a minute to read the last one, if you would.
Okay, thank you.
Hello all. I listened in on the metrics meeting and I have some thoughts. I believe that parents who chose in-person learning are committed to this and would be willing to take the chance of sudden changes at the last minute due to staff absences for the option of continued in-person learning. This is a risk that parents assume is always possible and should not be a reason to pivot to remote. Also, why not keep the classes open for who have teachers that are present and able to teach? Why do a full shutdown? Additionally, I believe that the K2 recommendation being brought to the board tonight should be extended to include K4, even if that means half days for these students. Also, what about children with IEPs who have specific learning needs and instructional minutes with special ed services that are required by law? How will these kids' needs be served? The most concerning issue is the staff. The number of staff absences is disproportionately high compared to student absences. Why are so many teachers sick compared to the rest of the population? What is the criteria for teachers to call in sick? I have to wonder whether these absences are possibly a product of other things aside from illness. I only say this after listening in on the metrics meetings weekly and listening to the WEA leaders' comments. The WEA leadership is overwhelmingly negative. They have been steadfast in moving to the remote model since the summer. They grasp at any avenue to push their agenda. At the beginning of the meeting today, they argued that it is still unsafe and the numbers could spike. After this was shut down by the physicians on the committee, they jumped on the bandwagon of poor staffing after they heard Heather Glowacki's recommendation. Anything to stay out of school is their very obvious motivation. Even the request to teach from home remotely instead of at school, as other professionals do. We are doing a huge disservice to our kids. It is clear that we have a staffing problem, but it's becoming increasingly clear that the staffing problem is a possibility of a product of something that is not solely due to illness or quarantine.
That's 2 minutes.
Okay. Katie, I'm going to read the next one.
Okay.
Joanna Reed. Unless there is a health and safety issue that prevents the schools from reopening next week, based on legitimate metrics, there is no good reason not to reopen for in-person learning. Staff shortages are not an option at this point. We missed 5 days of school for Thanksgiving break and 1 for teacher planning. We know, pediatricians know, social workers know, and kids know that they learn better in person and also need in-person interaction to feel fulfilled and emotionally secure. I appreciate all that's been done to make in-person work thus far and credit the administration and teachers for doing so successfully. Let's not give up now and let's put children first.
Public comment by Chase Martinez. It is clear that COVID is not being transmitted in school. I plead on behalf of our youngest students, thinking of my poor first grader. Please let the children return to school. Zoom school is not effective, it is demotivating, and all the screen time is so unhealthy for our young learners and extremely concerned parents.
Noah Rothschild. Good afternoon, D39 board. As the parent of a kindergartner and second grader at Mackenzie, I implore the board to keep the schools open with in-person learning. Young children need in-person interaction, and learning via technology does not work for little kids. My 5-year-old daughter struggles with remote learning on the iPad, but she loves school. The difference in outcome and attitude is night and day. Good news, the precautions of masking and social distance work. Numerous studies have confirmed COVID-19 does not spread in schools. Also, Illinois numbers are indeed trending downward from the recent spike. I hope with all my heart, and tax dollars too, that D39 will continue with in-person learning for young children. The kids and families are desperately hoping you show the courage and conviction to return to in-person education.
Comment by David Young. My wife is 8 months pregnant, and we also have a 3-year-old at home in addition to our Mackenzie student. We very much understand and are sensitive to the need to be safe in this time. That said, I've seen a big improvement in my second grade daughter's engagement with the class material and general happiness since transitioning back to in-person learning. It has been clear that the safety precautions that the school is taking are working, and a shortage of staff alone shouldn't break down the safe in-person system. We invest heavily in the school system through taxes and time to the school community. This is a period where that investment should continue to be matched by the school administration in keeping our kids in person engaged and happy with their learning experience.
Allie Rothschild. Good afternoon, D39 board. As the parent of a kindergartner and second grader at Mackenzie, I'm asking the board to keep the schools open with in-person learning. As a teacher myself, I'm aware of the challenges remote learning presents. I do not want this for my children. Remote learning is not sufficient. School is the safest place children can be right now. COVID is not spreading in schools based on all recent data. It is actually proven that COVID has not spread in our schools or my district since schools have been open. Also, Illinois numbers are trending downward from the recent spike. Please keep in-person learning open for our children. Let's base our decision on facts and data and not fear, please. Thank you for your time.
Comment by Robin McShane. If our students are remote learning from Thanksgiving break until after winter break, that will be 6 weeks out of the classroom. As a parent of a second grader and a kindergartner, that time lost is detrimental to my children's learning. While our teachers are doing all that they can to help manage the pivot to remote learning this week, it is not an easy shift for young students. Please get them back into the classroom.
Kelly Gruner. Dear committee, in light of the recent email that went out regarding testing, I wanted to follow up as my email does not reflect the information that in that email. She forwards her previous email, which I'll read after this. I was not aware that there would be a fee with the testing. I would have thought the testing would be made available for free in an effort to reopen our schools safely. Charging parents $85 is incredibly expensive. There must be a better way to administer testing affordably. Dear committee, I'm writing to you to in support of reopening next week for in-person learning. Our children need to be in school learning in a safe environment where all precautions are being taken to limit the spread of COVID. If you have been out and about taking walks or driving, you will see lots of kids in groups without masks or playing outside. Our kids need to be where it's safe in a controlled environment. Dr. Fauci has said schools should remain open and New York City is reopening its schools. So why can't District 39 figure out how to reopen? I've heard through the grapevine that the student testing will be available this week. If we are closing, why would the district waste money on testing all students this week? Also, I have heard that the reason we are not opening is that we are low staffed because many staff members either traveled or gathered with out-of-town families. I would hope this is a completely false rumor, as many of us took this very seriously and chose to do the right thing and stay home for a quiet single household holiday. I would prefer to present you with concrete facts, but these rumors swirling are unsettling. We can't change the damage that this has been done, but we can figure out a way to move forward.
Comment by Kristen Marvin. Dear all, with the weather turning against us, please strongly consider keeping the elementary schools open to the extent possible, as 1, schools do not appear to be sources of transmission, and 2, without outdoor activities, the children have very few safe avenues for peer or adult interaction. If the schools do shut, the plan should be to reopen them as quickly as possible. No gradual ease back or practice days, as we wasted precious days this past September easing into things for a month. If the metrics are in the right place, the schools should be open. Having to quarantine the week before Thanksgiving due to a classmate testing positive, I remain seriously underwhelmed by the remote learning experience. The instruction time is limited, the curriculum underwhelming, and my son's conclusion has been that second grade is so much easier than first.
Lindsay Bruzo. Hi, I wanted to share perspective from our family who has a new Trier freshman and 2 D39 kids. I find it to be ridiculous that they aren't in sync with going back to school plans. The staffing issues need to be better managed if this is the case. Bottom line is this is disjointed and doesn't help any household or the virus control. I hope someone with logic and common sense really weighs in on the obvious, simple disconnect. Please get on the same page. Thanks.
Comment by Claire Hoppenworth. Hello, please accept this email as request to keep WJHS open for in-person learning for for the weeks leading up to and following winter break. Thank you.
Katie Jones Pritchard. Hello. This email is in reference to the upcoming board meeting in which a decision will be made about a potential pivot to remote learning for in-person students. If public health statistics do not require a shutdown of public schools and the state government has not mandated it, I implore you to not close our schools. As a parent of 2 elementary age children, as well as a future D39 student, I cannot tell you how very important in-person learning has been to my children's ability to learn, as well as their overall well-being. At this point in the academic year, we know that the spread of COVID-19 is not happening in schools. D39 has implemented ample safety measures, and they are being correctly followed. Please do not punish our children by sending them back to remote learning when there is no public health data or actual school-based outbreaks to support this. Elementary school children especially need to be in school amongst their peers. My kindergartners simply cannot absorb anything from an iPad, and e-learning presents more harm than good. Please keep our kids in school.
Comment by Beckham Redzik. My name is Beckham Redzik. I'm a father of a 4th and 5th grader in the district. There's a rumor that the board will be recommended to go remote for the near future. The second wave positivity rate peaked around 10 days ago on 11/20 and is still declining, including today. In fact, our region is due for a mitigation easing. The school health reports have had very few COVID cases in them. 0 COVID infections, staff and students have been attributed to the schools. If this is a staffing issue and not a COVID issue, please acknowledge it as such. Thank you to all the teachers and staff who do show up.
Bill Springer. We understand discussions are ongoing regarding remote or in-person learning for the 2 weeks prior to the winter holiday. On both an academic and social level, with the disparity between in-person and remote learning is material, and can significantly differ amongst students in the same class. With scholastic changes already implemented due to COVID, adding further limitations and hurdles is extremely problematic and could create long-term problems for the students while being untenable for many working parents. Due to these clear potential risks, I would assume the school wouldn't move to extended remote learning without significant COVID justification. This justification is a high hurdle based on current evidence and understanding regarding the benefits and concerns with in-person learning released by CDC and other professional groups. My understanding is that the metrics team is considering a full remote for certain classes for reasons other than COVID risk for the children. This is an unacceptable change, creating further hurdles for students already carrying a heavy burden. With many outside events canceled, students will not only have reduced academic exposure and advantage, but also no social outlet. Unless the metrics numbers indicate remote learning is absolutely necessary to protect children, choosing remote would be a disservice to the children both now and going forward, as well as a tremendous burden for families. Best regards.
Comment by Stacy Worrell. Dear Dr. Cremascoli and District 39 Board, please see my email below from November 9th. The metrics do not support closing the schools between Thanksgiving and the end of the year. The CDC is recommending that the safest place for kids is in school. New York City is keeping schools open for pre-K through 4th. See link for the article, and then there's a link provided. 80% of District 39 parents are fine having their children in school per the communication survey. If there's a lack of teachers, then call on the substitute teachers and the parents that have signed up to teach. Ask for additional help if needed. I know 3 parents personally in District 39 that have signed up to teach if there is a teacher shortage. Please use these resources and keep the schools open. We are in this together.
Then Katie, could I have you continue with her previous email until Frank?
Sure, the November 9th one.
Yes, please.
Dear Dr. Cremascoli and District 39 Board of Education, I am writing to you regarding what has been going on with the Metrics Committee over the last few weeks and the recent push from WA members and others to close District 39 schools between Thanksgiving and the end of the calendar year. I do not support this initiative in any way. Our kids belong in schools. To reverse course at this point and go remote, there would have to be substantial data to support that move. As far as I can tell, it simply doesn't exist. My son is a third grader at Central School. There have been a couple of infections at his school since we started in-person learning, and they have been dealt with effectively. From what I understand, there have been individual cases reported in other schools as well. And again, they have been dealt with effectively. The fact remains that there have been no outbreaks in our schools, and our schools remain a very safe place for our students and teachers. All of the studies and considerations I have seen to date regarding whether to keep kids in school or not to have to do with the potential downside of keeping them in school. What I haven't seen is the other side of the equation. Has anyone done any work to analyze or provide insights as to the potential damage done to children when they are not in school for prolonged periods of time? It's a big concern to most parents. Based on the communication from District 39, the majority of parents prefer to have their children in school, knowing that things are not perfect, but still moving forward. For those families and teachers that want a remote option, it is available to them. Thank you for your continued hard work and efforts.
Dan Johnson, thanks for taking public comments. I'd ask that you task each school principal to manage the absences among staff by class by class, rather than simply shutting down the district for most kids. If half the staff is available to work, then half the kids ought to go to school. We slow the spread when school is open. It's the safest place for kids to be. We spent 6 weeks getting the schools ready. Let's use it. Please consider tasking each school to manage with the staff that they have, and just like when a specific class needs to quarantine, but the rest of that grade goes to school. If a specific teacher can't work and no substitute can be found, then the class would be remote while the rest of the grade goes to school. We ought to keep the buildings open with the staff that we have week by week and day by day. Thanks again.
Comment by Kasia Poor. Good evening. We have seen such a positive difference in our 6-year and 4-year-old with an IEP since school returned to in-person learning in September. We are asking that you consider bringing children back to school next week. We are very concerned that the progress that the kids made in October and November would be lost and we would see regression. If the kids are out of school for 6 weeks total with Thanksgiving break and winter break. The youngest kids need routine and structure, and changes like these are especially hard for them. Our fully potty trained 4-year-old regressed when school went remote, and then again when we went back in person, because these changes are very hard for the youngest kids. Most importantly, there is no evidence of any significant spread in the elementary schools. We have been back in person for over 2 months, and kids and teachers were safely working together, and kids were thriving. Let's not go backwards. The experts emphasize the importance of keeping children in school. Please let our youngest students and students with special needs back in school.
Lisa Lang, my son has special needs. When we were able to get in-school learning for ELA 2 days and full day 2 days, his learning, self-esteem, and mood dramatically improved. Please consider the kids in middle school are not causing COVID spikes. Having kids in front of screens with no social interaction is proven to be really bad for them. The protocols in schools seem to be working well in our district. I just don't understand why the board would consider pivoting to fully remote at this time. And I'm going to go ahead and continue to read the ones that have come in after we've printed these off. Rachel Hilgeman. Hello again. Why is Dr. Cremascoli sending out an announcement of plans before the board has voted? Also, how can administrators know that we won't have sufficient staffing in 2 weeks from now, the week of the 14th? Why not make decisions week by week as was done previously? And why are we tacking on an additional week after winter break? This simply enables staff and families to continue to travel and/or extend their travel plans. The WEA will exploit these added weeks to extend remote learning for even longer periods of time. Making decisions in this manner eliminates the voice of the parent community. Very disappointing. Lindsay Ratte. Thank you all for meeting tonight and hoping you had a nice holiday. I received the email about taking a pause until January 11th, unless your child is in the younger years or if they have special services. This is a great and needed for those kids and their ages. Since we don't see a breakout in school and we know that the ILDH is counting probable causes like flu and cold along with COVID cases, we cannot base our closing of schools off those numbers. Thank you. Lisa Breen. Dear board members, I'm so disappointed in the union representatives' push towards remote learning. This is not backed up by any data, the needs of the students, or the preference of many parents within this community who chose in-person learning. I am a teacher myself, and I'm outraged that the union appears to put the needs of our district students at the bottom of their priorities. Our board has done a fantastic job with the following protocol and keeping our students safe. They have handled the small amount of COVID cases swiftly and successfully. The toll these students not being in school, learning and socializing is a palpable one. The stakes are rising in the social emotional damage to these children, and I'm no longer going to stand by quietly and watch it happen. Our students have the right to attend school in person. They have the right to see friends in school safely. They have the right to learn, to feel connected, challenged, and belong somewhere. Until there is valid, tangible data showing that in-person learning presents too high of a risk, schools should be open. Our schools should not have to work remotely. Our students should not have to work remotely because teachers decided to travel against non-travel recommendations. COVID-19 testing is now easily accessible in and out of our district. This will be even greater benefit to keeping our schools open. I'm not going to send this email off with my recommendations for school to stay open and then sit by and do nothing. So I'm not going to personally offer myself as a volunteer to help in any way I can. As a certified teacher, I will offer to come in school when I can. I will cover a classroom. I will work with students who need extra help. I will do my part because as a teacher, this is what I signed up to do. It won't be easy being an employed mother of three, but I will try. I hope the teachers and the union representatives know this, feel humbled by it, and perhaps feel embarrassed by their inability to put our students' needs first. Molly McDermott. To the Board of Education. After seeing the proposed plan to be voted on tonight, I'm absolutely stunned that this is the recommendation for the board and urge you to please vote against the paused in-person plan. Keeping our students out of school and in remote learning until January 11th at the earliest is going to be incredibly detrimental to their education, social, and mental health development. There is no explanation as to why it is okay for students in second grade to attend, but not fourth and/or sixth. Please vote no on this proposal and continue to work on behalf of the students who so desperately need to be in school. Best. And then she continues with a forwarded email. To Board of Education, thank you for your continued support and hard work in trying to keep our schools open for in-person learning. It is extremely disappointing to hear the union representatives are pushing to not go in person, especially as our neighboring school districts in Winnetka and Kenilworth remain open for in-person instruction daily. With no evidence of in-school transmission, there is no reason we should continue to remote learning when the amazing staff within District 39 has succeeded in providing in-person learning and isolating specific classrooms as needed. Additionally, the November 30th metrics report shows that the positivity rate in both Wilmette and Nutria Township have decreased below the 8% threshold since the decision for a one-week pause. This decrease should return the kids to school immediately. Remote learning has been inconsistent and provided little value to both our fourth and sixth grade students. To miss another 3+ weeks of in-person learning will be detrimental to both their educational success and mental health, especially our sixth grader, who is falling further and farther behind his peers. These kids need to be in school and learn in person. It is safe and vital for these kids to learn in person. Thank you for your consideration of our concerns. Kara Fleming. Thank you for taking my comment. This note is in support of continued in-person instruction during the weeks of December 7th and December 14th for all D39 schools. My children have been attending in person, Harper, or in the hybrid model, Highcrest, and are thriving. If their teachers are available and healthy, each school and class can make a decision to meet in person. If a class cannot meet due to student or teacher quarantine or staff availability, then that can be managed at a class level within the school. Please preserve in-person instruction for the maximum number of students possible. Thank you for your consideration. Christina Ballister. Dear Dr. Cremascoli and board, I was pleased to see today an effort for the district to test any concerned students or staff. How else are you stopping the spread? You are mandating masks and social distancing, limiting access to electives, shutting down cafeterias and water fountains, and requiring form attestations, sorry for the pronunciation, from those coming to school. I read today that someone placed the notion in the metrics committee that all of those things don't matter. They don't count because a number of the community erases all those good measures and they want to change to e-learning until mid-January. But I submit that you remember one has nothing to do with the other. And how do we know that? The proof is in the pudding. We have been in-person learning since the end of September and no outbreaks. Has the Department of Health investigated your schools? No. Have there been multiples in a classroom sick? No. So what are we talking about here? One word, fear. What we do know is the safety measures in place have and are working. The data, which your own metrics team acknowledged, shows a steady line basically mirrors that of a stable environment and one that does not mirror what is currently occurring in the community. I humbly submit that it's not your responsibility to govern the curb in the community. The role is to govern what occurs within the four walls of each school right now. There is no need to pull back on what is working. My 8 and 11-year-old also do not deserve to fall backwards either on the good work they have accomplished because of the fear factor. And yes, it's true. Our teachers don't deserve to go to an unsafe setting where they are at risk to contract COVID. Here's the good news. Teachers are not in an unsafe environment with the measures in place, and our kids, in turn, are getting the best education they deserve in person without unnecessary impediments. So let's not shake the tree unnecessarily out of fear. For all the apples will fall, knocking us off our good path. It is difficult to say, at the least, that we will need to send a 5-year-old to a 4-day rec center program to watch a computer and email his teacher and the aide to ensure everyone is on the same page on learning needs. To expect our young child to learn like this for the next 4 weeks of school without regression from all the good he has accomplished since in-person learning started is a fallacy. If you recall in prior emails, he was jumping on the couch after 35 minutes routinely in September, and I can't wait to see what occurs this week.
That's 3 minutes.
Okay. Michelle Coffey. Good evening. While I appreciate the time and attention the metrics committee has given in order to come up with their recommendations, I find it frustrating and sad to see the main reason our kids can't get back to school is because of the lack of staffing. Please consider returning our children to school on December 5th and maintaining business as usual. If a teacher is sick, his or her classroom can go remote until ready to be back in school, rather than closing the entire school until January. Our children have missed enough school. Our 5th through 8th grade students are suffering academically and, more importantly, socially and emotionally. Please consider a better solution than fully remote for these kids. Again, our surrounding districts are back to school. Catholic schools are back to school. And here we're deciding to keep our students remote until January for the wrong reasons. Our schools were able to be open and safe for our children. There is no reason to go backwards now. Please consider overriding the metric committee's recommendation and instead choosing our kids back in school on December 5th. Thank you. Brian Noveline. Board, I know you were not all in attendance for the call this morning on November 30th, but the email update I just received is not a fair accounting of the meeting. The number one reason cited for not recommending a return to in-person classes was the staffing challenge, according to Dr. Heather Glowacki. After Mark Steen probed further, she revealed that the biggest issue was driven by teachers needing to quarantine after traveling last week. This fact is very disappointing to all the families that stayed home upon the recommendation of the district and for a community that values quality education highly. However, it's even worse to see the email at 4:48 p.m. that fails to acknowledge that this was the key issue, which is very clearly articulated on the call today. I want to reiterate how much I appreciate the hard work of the Board of Education and the staff to keep the school open and safe. But this type of communication erodes the trust between the advisory team and the District 39 parents. Best. Mr. Christopher Wojciorek. Recent CDC data shows that schools are statistically the safest places for both students and teachers to be with respect to COVID-19 transmission. This means that by closing the schools, District 39 is in fact ensuring that students and teachers will be at greater risk of infection, as any other location will be demonstrably less safe than the school and the classroom. We believe strongly that our children should be in face-to-face instruction with their teachers and not left to pursue their own education with minimal guidance, as they seem to be now. The last several months of lockdown education has been devastating for the advancement of our children, especially our son, who has always been extremely bright, responsive, and productive in the classroom, but has languished horribly in remote learning. Furthermore, we are extremely put out by the way these decisions are being made with such little notice and opportunity to gather alternative options. It seems like this process has been specifically tailored to give little time as possible for opponents to marshal their resources. Andrea Zito, good evening. Given the required 2 weeks of quarantine due to travel of families having people from out of state or those from outside their immediate household over Thanksgiving, I request that you extend remote instruction for all learners next week to help provide safely for our students and our staff members. Thank you. Avita Vulgaris. If staff absences due to a vacation and quarantine was a significant factor for the weeks after Thanksgiving, how committed are the staff? Furthermore, why is the week after New Year already being recommended for remote learning? One more from Christopher Wojciorek. All of your flowery language and self-congratulations aside, the fact that District 39 is taking grades 3 through 8 students out of the classroom because of staffing issues is a huge failure for the faculty, administration, and the board. The uncertainty for the children is nothing compared to the damage and disappointment done by remote learning. Michelle Babe. Please consider in-person learning for our students. Dear board members, as a mother of 3 kids at Highcrest, WJHS, and New Trier, I am witnessing firsthand the effects of remote learning, and it's not positive. I implore you to please consider prioritizing the students' mental, social, and emotional health and education over the union, and please keep them in school and move to full-time as quickly as possible. I have been so impressed by how well D39 has handled the small amount of COVID cases and kept the students safe. Every article I read about how other countries are handling the pandemic always include prioritizing kids in school full-time due to the low transmission. I'm not seeing any tangible data showing otherwise. My kids are struggling, and I know we're not alone. At this point, it's already going to take months to catch up and reverse the setbacks. Let's not make it years. Thank you for your tireless hours in figuring all this out. My husband and I work full time, but if needed, I will find time to volunteer and help in person, in school, however I can. It is the very least I can do to do my part. Last comment, Stephen Nielsen. Dear school board members, thank you for considering the following comments from a parent with 2 children who attend school at Mackenzie in 1st and 3rd grade. 1, the Wall Street Journal reports that a study of over 200,000 students in over 47 states, the case rate is at a minuscule 0.13%. Studies show that schools are not super spreaders and risk to teachers is also minimal. And then he references a website article. 2, remote learning is a comparative disaster for children's learning, and the negative impact compounds the younger students, the younger the student is. A study in Fairfax, Virginia evidences this. And then he references a URL article. 3, the board should place the needs of the children as paramount, and when weighing the health risk of COVID versus the negative impact of children's mental, emotional, and social development, especially at such a critical young age, there's no rational basis that permit you to conclude that the risk of COVID poses the required remote learning that supposes that require remote learning outweighs the negative impacts of being prevented from learning in person. 4, my wife is an educator, and we have both personally observed an extreme drop-off in skill development and knowledge retention when our children attend school remotely. Remote learning is simply an insufficient method of education, and no amount of consistency or quality in remote education can overcome the detriment caused by the virtual medium delivered in isolation. Do not continue to do harm to our children that will reverberate through their lives long after COVID poses a minuscule threat that currently does. Please do the right thing. Actually, we have one last one. Courtney Greens. Dear Dr. Cremascoli and board, I have yet to write to you or the board because up to this point, I have trusted that you are making the best decisions on behalf of our children, up to the best of your ability. I've entrusted you with that, but also it's the job of those employed by D39. Today's news that school is going remote for grades 3 and up between holidays is a huge disappointment. My family stayed home and socially distanced from our extended family over Thanksgiving break with the hopes that school would return in person. I have heard from other parents after your 448 email, and it sounds like many people believe the primary reason all children are not returning to in-person is because we don't have enough staff to go fully in person. This is where you being transparent with families is really important. Why is school not opening next week or the week of the 14th? By being silent on the truth of the matter, you have lost the trust of many families over the last 5 hours. You should work to redeem it. That starts with transparency. I'm sure you know what other districts are doing and the common belief that they're handling in-person learning far better than Wilmette. Your mishandling of in-person learning will impact where families move and send their children to school. Not to mention your actions to go remote are detrimental to our children's well-being. None of the above addresses the fact that schools are the safest place for our children right now. COVID is not being spread at schools. All medical literature shows that children's mental and emotional health depends on in-person learning. Also, while I'm at it, why does Harper have the blue spacers for the children to use at lunch when other districts have clear dividers affixed to the children's desk, which are not only easier, safer, but allow the children to actually see one another? Imagine that, seeing other children's faces at lunch. The fact that I have to comment on this is absurd. Thank you. And that ends all the public comment received.
Thank you very much, Katie and Tony. At this point in the agenda, we're going to move to a motion regarding the in-person instruction. The administration has recommended to go fully remote from December 7th to January 8th. I want to acknowledge the conversation that we've had. And there's two ways to go on this. The first is we get a motion to on the recommendation regarding in-person instruction for December 7th through January 8th, or I've heard that there's an appetite for approving a recommendation for remote instruction for one additional week only. Or we can just go, why don't we go, do we want to do that? Or do we want to go ahead, go ahead and take a vote on the original motion and have a discussion?
Yeah, Lisa, I'm not sure you said the second option right, but because you said fully remote and there's a K through 2.
Oh, you're right,
proposal.
Frank. You're right. So maybe, you know what, let's go ahead and vote on the original motion so we can discuss it. Either vote on it or vote it down, and then come up with an alternative if that's what we'd like to do. Does that work? Okay, so I seek a motion to approve the recommendation regarding in-person instruction for December 7th through January 8th.
You said in-person instruction.
Yes, the in-person instruction, the recommendation made by the administration, which is in-person instruction, would be pre-K through 2nd grade plus comprehensive needs students. So that would be starting next Monday, so the 7th, through the week after break. Is that clear? I want to be super clear what we're voting on.
No, that's not quite right yet.
All right, maybe you can move and second to approve the recommendation if in fact that's what you're trying to do. And then I can summarize the recommendation so that everyone is really clear about what they're either voting for or voting against, and you all can discuss then.
So let me try. I'd move to approve the recommendation proposed by the administration for instruction from December 7th through January 8th.
Perfect, Frank. Thank you. Can I have a second?
I will second that.
Carrie, can you describe it? And then I'll open this up for discussion.
Yes, thank you. So the recommendation is to continue the adaptive pause to in-person instruction for the weeks of December 7th and December 14th with prioritization of in-person instruction for our neediest and youngest students, including students in our special education comprehensive needs program and students in our early childhood through 2nd grade classrooms. In addition, the board is asked to approve an additional week of remote learning for all students for the week of January 4th to allow for a safe transition back to in-person schooling, predictable instruction for students, adequate time for family planning, and the coordination of COVID-19 testing for students and staff upon return from break.
So this means, just to be very clear, this would mean though that pre-K through 2 plus comprehensive needs would be in school, assuming there's enough, there's sufficient staff to provide that education safely. And that 3 through 8 would remain fully remote through the new year and that first week. That's what's on the table. Aaron.
Well, and the decision has to be made right now.
No. So
all the
what
way
we do is
through
we have to discuss that motion
Oh, sure. Sorry.
and either
Yeah,
vote it down and come up with a new one or approve it.
Gotcha.
So this allows us to
Okay.
have a discussion on the merits of this motion or amend. Amy.
So it would be my preference to vote that down and bring a new proposal for 1 week in exactly the way you just described. And to think of it in much the way that we've been doing every week, where we plan a week in advance and see where the metrics take us and if that is warranted for the last week before winter break.
Aaron,
I agree with Amy. And I also want to clarify the week we're talking about in January. Does that involve pre-K through 2 and the comprehensive needs kids being in person? I didn't think.
No, you are correct, Aaron. The
Okay.
way it was recommended is for a full week of remote learning to safely transition back to in-person instruction again. That was the recommendation. It is the board's opportunity to vote that down and then amend the motion in whatever way you see fit. We know that there's testing discussion that will happen next week that may help to advise that further.
others? Mark,
I think I'm in the same place as others, including certainly Amy and Aaron concurred. I think the 1 week plan, again, as I said previously, I am willing to hold out hope for that next week.
thank you, Mark. Frank?
Yeah, the standard cadence is we have the metric meeting on Friday for the 10 days later, which would be then that second week. So there is a procedure for that. The next exception, though, is what we do for the week after, the first week of January. That would have to be decided logistically, realistically, before the winter break to make everything run relatively smoothly. But we can discuss that at the committee of the whole on next Monday. So yes, I would also be in agreement that we use the standard procedures, the standard cadence, and use this Friday's metric meeting to decide the procedures for the last week of December.
Amy, did I see your hand?
I was just gonna, and maybe the committee of the whole is the time to talk about this, but I'd love to think about that return after the new year, because we planned this week remote to have a safe return back to school. And now I'm concerned that if we do vote to have that first week back, that it's not going to be enough. And that, I think we need to think differently about it. So I'd love to have a longer conversation about that return.
Others? Mark?
I would just point out, Amy, one thing that I like about the difference after winter break, and we don't have to decide this now, but is at least we have the potential to have testing in that week, which I think gives us a better chance of having only a 1 week transition as opposed to a longer transition, which I think is what I hear you concerned about.
Ellen?
I thought you were going somewhere different with it, Amy. I'd actually also like to take the committee of the whole to consider some of the ideas that were presented by some of the parents, actually, in regards to that week after it, after we come back from winter break. Just the thinking, which I'm sure Heather and everyone has been through, but different approaches to how we handle it after the pause, if we run into this again with potential shortage or whatever. Just thinking out of the box or whatever. I don't know. I'm sure you guys have been through every possibility, but it's always worth looking at. Kind of curious.
John?
Yeah, I agree with the group here. I think that we should do this week by week, and if we need to have more meetings, I think we should announce that we should have more meetings, because it's clearly important to all of us.
Yep, thank you, John. And I was negligent in thanking everybody for hopping on this evening. this evening's special board meeting. So it sounds to me like we have consensus and are ready to craft, well, we're ready to take a vote on the current motion and craft a new one. So why don't we just go ahead and, clerk, can you please call the roll?
John Caesarretti,
No.
Frank Panzeca,
No.
Amy Paling,
No.
Mark Steen,
No.
Alan Sternweiler,
No.
Aaron Stone,
No.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes.
No. Motion does not pass. So let's go ahead and come up with an alternative motion. What I've heard is that we are approving the in-person instruction modification proposed by the administration for the week of December 7th. Is that a clear motion that everybody understands? Okay, may I have a second? Oh, John, go ahead.
Yeah, are we approving the slow start in January?
No,
Okay. No,
we're gonna discuss that in the committee of the whole.
thanks.
So do I need to restate the motion or do we have it? Okay, can I get a second?
Yeah, I'll
Second.
second.
I'll give that to Frank. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
John Caesarretti,
Yes.
Frank Panzeca,
Yes.
Amy Paling,
Yes.
Mark Steen,
Yes.
Alan Sternweiler,
Yes.
Aaron Stone,
Yes.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you all. I know this has been a long journey and a long meeting, so I thank you all for your time. And again, to the administration for a yeoman's job. A special shout out to Heather and her team, who I believe has been probably working around the clock all through the Thanksgiving weekend. And your efforts are never go unnoticed, Heather. So thank you very much. So we will see each other all again next. Nope, go ahead. Dr. Kramascoli.
You have a second approval for the institutional billing access
Oh.
to Ambry COVID-19 testing, if you would like to take action on that.
I do. So I apologize. I seek a motion to approve the fees for the institutional billing access to Ambry COVID-19 testing.
I move to approve the fees identified for the institutional billing access to Ambry COVID-19 testing.
May I have a
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the Ambry testing? I'll just say again, I know that was a lot of work getting that identified, rolled
you.
out, the procedure, so thank you. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
John Caesarretti,
Yes.
Frank Panzeca,
Yes.
Amy Paling,
Yes.
Mark Steen,
Yes.
Alan Sternweiler,
Yes.
Aaron Stone,
Yes.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes.
Yes. Motion carries. So now I think we are ready to seek a motion to adjourn this special meeting of the District 39 Board of Education.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Clerk, will you please call the roll?
John Caesarretti,
Yes.
Frank Panzeca,
Yes.
Amy Paling,
Yes.
Mark Steen,
Yes.
Alan Sternweiler,
Yes.
Aaron Stone,
Yes.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes.
Yes. Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you,
Thank
administration.
you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Heather,
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
right.